This training topic is how to demonstrate the Florida family law application in detail. In terms of the setup, I'm working with the demo server. I'm logged in as Stephen K. The form set is 18286, and it is a completed application for divorce. And a couple of other things. As you know, there's a separate training video for how to demonstrate the application interface, the overview of that. So while I would normally incorporate that into this particular demonstration, when I get to that part, I'll just quickly say, this is where I talk about the interface, and then I'll quickly skip and go right into the rest of it. So consider that sort of like a placeholder for that. The other thing is that it's not uncommon to start these demonstrations with the TurboCourt homepage where we are now, whether logged in or not logged in. Right now I've logged in already. And this is not uncommon for where to start, and then we'll go into an application and a form set that's already been prepared. And of course, I almost always have it prepared, so we don't spend a lot of time watching me type. It may be that the form set you want to go to is right here in the top 5, in which case you can click right into it. But if not, as will be the case here, then I'll talk about, of course, as part of that introduction to the homepage, I'll talk about once they log in, they can see their 5 most recent filings, etc. And then if they need to look at other filings, they can click List All to see other filings. And it's from here that I'll actually find the form set that I need and go into it. So that's what I'm going to be doing in this particular demonstration. Okay, so let's assume that I've already done the basic intro about the filer portal and that I've logged in. And so now we're going to take a look at, in this case, a family law application. All right, so let's take a look at a family law application for self-represented litigants. And I'll actually focus on one that happens to be in Florida. And so I've already prepared one that we can take a look at. And as we talked about, the filer, once they've logged in, they can search for different form sets and filings that they're working on. So this is one that I've already prepared so that we don't have to spend a lot of time watching me type. So it happens to be form set number 18286. And so it's Florida Family Law. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And this is actually going to take me to the completed form set. As you can see, we generate a lot of forms for the Florida Family Law application. But let's actually go to the beginning and see how we actually got here, because that's really the magic, and I want to show you how this all works. All right, so what we're looking at now is the beginning of the Florida Family Law application. And this is where I talk about the interface overview, and now let's assume that I've finished talking about the interview. All right, so when I click Next, it takes me to the What Can We Help You With Today screen. And so this is our first fork in the road. Why is the person here? And so we show the different what we call filing pathways or scenarios that they can pursue. In this case, start a case to get a divorce, or answer the petition for dissolution with marriage. So in this situation, I've actually said I'm going to start a case to get a divorce. And so we talk to them about what they're going to need to file their case, and this is going to help them start thinking about it and what papers they need and so forth, and that's very helpful. It also gives you an idea that they may not be able to finish this all in a single sitting, which is not a problem, because at any point in time they can click the Save and Retrieve link, automatically save their partially completed interview, and because it's web-based, they can come back at any time. They don't even have to use the same computer. They may have started this at their sister's home and then realized they needed some papers, and then they'll finish it at their place. So they can do that at any time, which is very nice. All right, so it's not uncommon for us to establish what the requirements are right up front. In fact, anytime there are key requirements, we put that at the very beginning so that we don't waste their time, and then 20 minutes later we say, well, you're in the wrong place, or whatever, or you don't qualify. So any sort of key filing requirements for this area of law, we put right up front, explain them, of course, and then make sure that they qualify so, again, they don't waste their time. So this has to do with residency requirements, and then it turns out in Florida they need to provide proof, so they have to indicate what sort of proof they're going to be providing, and then they actually establish, in this case, an affidavit of a corroborating witness will actually generate that form for them. So that's just some general getting started. So why are you here? Okay, now that we know why you're here, these are the requirements. Do you meet those requirements? And then, of course, we take them to a very brief section review. I'll focus on the section review a little bit later on as it gets more interesting. So when I click Next, it automatically takes me to the very next section, Family Information. So it's just walking me through, guiding me through that process. And notice that, in fact, these FAQs, as I mentioned, do dynamically change from one page to the next. And so now we're collecting information about me, the filer, and certain fields are required. They have the asterisk. Other fields are not, and it's basic functionality. But if you leave a required field empty, then we'll stop you, highlight the issue, and make sure that you provide the necessary information before you proceed. And so here's Stephanie, and she lives at 100 Main Street. She's not a member of the military. I'll click Next, and now we're going to collect information about the other party. So he's Jeff. And here's an interesting thing. So we're asking about, well, where does Jeff live right now? So if they happen to live together, they don't have to retype the address. So one of the things we do, and you'll see this a little bit later on as well, is that we reuse addresses and other names wherever possible. And so this allows the person to fill out the interview much faster. It also alleviates the possibility that they mistype the same address twice. So they might inadvertently transpose some numbers the second time they type it. So this alleviates that problem. But in this case, we're saying, no, they don't live together. He lives at another address, and he lives over on Silver Road now. Okay. And we go on, and so your date of birth and Social Security are required in Florida, but optional for the other party because you may or may not know it. Keep in mind also that you'll start to notice that we're embedding the names of the parties into the actual interview itself. So, and you'll see this as we add children as well. And this is incredibly helpful to the filer answering these interview questions because as you start asking, and you might say the other party or the respondent or whatever wording you come up with, they very often start scratching their head and like, okay, now who is that again? Am I that person? Is that the other person? And that's a very common way for people to fill out the forms incorrectly. By saying, where does Sally live now? Then they know exactly who you're asking about, and they don't have to run into that problem, and they're able to provide more accurate information. So here, tell us Jeff's date of birth. Okay, so now I know exactly who you're asking about. Okay, so let's take a look at the marriage information screen. So we've got our date of marriage and where you were married and so forth. Now, are you separated? And if so, what was your date of separation? Now, we, of course, validate dates. So, you can't put date of marriage as some date in the future. For example, you can't put February 31st, things like that. You can't say your child is a minor and then the date of birth makes them 37 years old, things like that. But we can also compare dates. So, for example, if I inadvertently say that my date of separation occurred before my date of marriage, the program's going to say, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. This date can't be before 1/1/1980, which is your marriage date, so one of those dates is wrong. And so now I get to say, oh, no, that's totally screwed that up. That's my date of separation, and I go on from there. Okay, so the other thing, and I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I did talk about how the interviewer will know which questions to ask and which questions are not relevant. So it's a very highly interactive and personalized interview. So let me show you an example of that. So on the family status page here, we ask about children, and they said, yes, we've got some children, and currently in high school between 18 and 19 and so forth, not pregnant. Okay, but let's say I said no to all of those, and I click Next. Well, take a note of what happens at the top here. 5 sections, all related to children, are deactivated. They're not relevant to my situation, so I simply skip over them, and now I have a much shorter interview and probably a very different form set as a result of that. And so that's a very sort of obvious example of how the questionnaire will dynamically change based on the way I'm responding to the questions. But that happens throughout the interview process. And the thing that's really interesting about it is that the filer doesn't really need to know what's going on in the background. They just know that based on the way I'm answering the questions, I'm being asked sort of the next logical set of questions that follows up from that. And it flows very smoothly and easily. Okay, so I'm going to change those back to yes. And sure enough, we'll reactivate those questions. And then we go through the rest of the section. I'll just skip through some of these pages. And here we get to the section review again. But here you can see it's a bit more interesting because I have a lot more information now. And what's nice is that I can edit directly in the section review. So I made a mistake. It's not Silver Road. It's Silver Avenue. And so rather than having to go back and find the page and and change the answer there, I can do that right here in the section review. The other thing that's nice about the section review is later on, let's say when you're talking about assets and debts, and maybe you weren't quite sure what was being asked or you didn't answer properly, you want to go back to a page, you want to maybe reread some of the FAQs to make sure you understood it properly. Again, you don't have to hit the back button 10 times to find that page or whatever that is. You can just go right to that section, and here in the section review, for example, I can click on any of these links and it will basically take me right back to that page, and then I can make my edit here if I want to and proceed on from there. So lots of easy navigation for people not only to fill it out but then to go back and review and edit it. Okay, so now we're in section 3, spousal support, and I'm not going to walk through all of these pages, but obviously we do cover that. We've got the introduction and whether or not you want spousal support, but I'm just going to jump ahead to section 4. I'm able to do that, of course, because, as I said, I've already filled this out completely. So now section 4 is information about the children that I said we have, and so how many children, and I just kept it simple. I said 1, and so her name is Nancy, and she's a minor, common to both parties, so they have different designations. And now we want to get information about Nancy. And again, we start embedding the children's names in the questions as well, and that's really helpful because you might have 4 or 5 kids, and if it says, does child number 4 have a social security number, and you may have already forgotten who you listed as child number 4. So again, it just makes it much easier for folks to fill this out. Okay, I'm going to jump around a little bit. Don't need to really go through every single page here, but let's talk about primary physical custodian and some of the more advanced logic, again, of TurboCourt. So who does Nancy live with now? So my choices here are presented as Stephanie, Jeff, someone else, and I don't know. So why doesn't it say both parents? Well, it doesn't say both parents because previously, if you remember, I indicated that Jeff and Stephanie don't live together anymore. So they may split time, but we're talking about primary physical custodian. And so in this situation, it's either or. Now, if I were to go back and say that, in fact, Jeff lives with me, and I hit next. Let's jump ahead to that children section again. Now the question is the same, but the choices dynamically change. So again, the interviewer, the questionnaire, knows what's allowed and what's not allowed, and prevents conflicting information from making it onto the forms and ultimately making it to the judge. But let me just go back and change that back to that they don't live together. Okay, jumping back to the children's section. All right, so there you go again. Stephanie is the primary physical custodian. And then, of course, we ask about if there's other people claiming rights, and if yes, then there'll be some additional follow-up questions. All right. Let's jump ahead to the children's residence history, because this is where you've got that federal requirement where you need to capture a 5-year residence history for all of the children, and that can get really complicated if they've lived in lots of different places, or different children live with different people at different times and so forth, and are you really capturing 5 years? Well, TurboCourt handles all of that, and it handles it in a very elegant and simple fashion. So first of all, we've got the one child in this situation, and it's Nancy and her date of birth, and she currently lives with Stephanie at this address. So we've reiterated what you've said, so you're like, oh, okay, wait a minute, that wasn't right, and you can go back and change that. When did Nancy start living there? And I put here January 1st, 2001, which is clearly more than 5 years. So you can see I'm just going to go to the section review. I'm done. I've collected 5 years worth of residence. Well, let's say I inadvertently said 2001, and really it's 2010, not 5 years. Well, the program will look at that and says, okay, that's not 5 years, so where did she live before that? So what was Nancy's previous address? And again, you can reuse any addresses that were previously provided, or you might say another address. So let's just say she lived there, and then provide the dates that she lived there, and we'll analyze the dates. And if you've now given us 5 years, we'll say, great, you can move on. But if you still have only given maybe 4 years worth, we'll say, okay, we need more. You can also say, I don't know. Maybe Nancy's 17, and for at the age of 16 she took off for 6 months, and you have no idea where she was. You can tell the program that. Let's say that Nancy is only 3.5 years old. Well, the program will look at that and say, okay, well, now I only need 3.5 years of residence history for her. So it will do all of that automatically, and again, it does it in a very simple and easy fashion, so the filer is able to fill out that information in a simple way, and you and the judge collect that information in a way that's accurate and meaningful, and everybody's happy. This is one of our test servers, so sometimes if our folks might be restarting it to do things, so I apologize. We'll try that one more time. Yep, there we go. All right, so let's set this back to 2001. And now that we've got 5 years, again, we don't need anything more than that. Okay, in Section 6, we cover things like if there's any other proceedings. I'll skip over that for right now. Section 7 is of particular interest, child custody and time sharing. And if you look at parental responsibility, we have a number of options here with FAQs really helping to define what all of this means, at least per the state of Florida. Sole parental responsibility, what does decision-making authority mean, and so forth. So we can basically create whatever FAQs are going to be helpful in guiding the person to fill this out as accurately as possible. Everybody's parenting plan, when I say everybody, I mean each jurisdiction, each state, they sort of have different requirements and different ways of doing it. So this is how it's done in Florida, but they talk about schooling and extracurricular activities and the weekday schedule and the weekend schedule and holiday schedules, and you can get as detailed or not as you want. So, for example, if I click on holiday schedule, do you want to tell us about the holiday schedule, and if so, which days and who gets, and it's every year, even years or odd years. Now, this is how Florida happens to do it. California takes a different approach. Arizona takes a different approach, but we can basically handle anything that you've got in terms of how you need us to establish a parenting plan. Some people don't go to this level of detail. They just provide large text boxes, 20 lines of text, and just explain what it is the holiday schedule is going to be. That's another way of doing it, and we just adapt accordingly based on your forms and the way you prefer to collect that information. All right, so let's go to Section 8, Financial Affidavit. This is this is kind of like filling out your taxes. It's a lot of financial information. What's very curious in Florida is they actually have two different sets of financial forms. They have essentially their short form, which is kind of like doing a 1040 EZ. It's a one-page, very simple form. That's the one, of course, everybody wants to fill out because it's super fast and easy. It's also the one that almost nobody qualifies for. It's a very restrictive form that certain people qualify to use. Everybody else has to fill out the big form, and that's the multi-page form, kind of like doing your taxes that most people have to do and don't want to do. And so one of the things that the clerks are constantly complaining about is, the filers will come in with their forms, but they come in with the wrong financial form, and then they have to send them back to do the financial affidavit, and everybody gets frustrated. Well, TurboCourt does that for them. Based on the way the filer has answered previous questions, we know whether or not they qualify for the short form or not, and we simply show them the questions for whichever form they qualify for. So if I were to qualify for the short form, then that's all I'd see here. Because I don't qualify for the short form, I don't even know about it, and I just amass the questions in the long form. So that's another area of logic that we could do that sort of a thing if that's appropriate. And so as you can see, we cover a lot of information here about your gross annual income and your occupation and your education, and then all other sources of income, and then we ask that about household expenses and so forth. And so, for example, in Florida, do you pay any expenses? Yes. Okay. Identify which you pay. I just check two to keep it simple: household and automobile. And so when I click next, it says, okay, well, now tell us about your household expenses, which ones? And again, I only selected two. Obviously, I would have more, but telephone and food. And so they say, okay, tell us how much you spend per month in telephone and how much you spend per month in food and supplies, because those are the only two I said I have. I can also indicate whether that's an estimate or not. Again, that's how Florida chooses to do it. And then you do the same thing with the automobile. If I click next, it'll then take me to, okay, tell me about your automobile expenses, and filling out that information accordingly. And then we go through the same process for the other party, for Jeff, and his income and so forth. And obviously then you get to your section review, where you can review everything and make any edits that you need to accordingly. All right. So if I hit next, it takes me to assets and liabilities. Again, new sets of FAQs that help them understand what's being asked of them. And just as you saw a moment ago, you can list what assets you have, and then we ask you information about each of those assets. So I said cash and automobiles. And so for cash, we ask about a description, a market value, and whether that's marital or non-marital property, again, per Florida statute. And then for automobiles, similar thing. And so the way we collect this information depends on the nature of the asset itself. And later on, we ask about the division of marital assets. And earlier on, I said that we had a Wells Fargo debt to pay. So who should pay it? Stephanie should, Jeff will, or it's going to be split. And whose name is on the account. If I were to say, however, that it should be split, then it's going to ask, okay, how does it get split? You said you had $5,000. Who's paying what? So let me just go back and say, no, we're not going to split it. Stephanie will pay that. But again, the interview dynamically changes based on the way we've said that, the way the person has previously responded. Okay, let's jump ahead to the child support section. And here, lots of information about child support, but I want to bring your attention to the time with children question, because again, we don't want the filer to have to do any sorts of calculations. And so, for them to figure out what percentage of time they spend, they typically can't figure that out. And so rather than asking them to do math, we simply ask, every week, 2 weeks, month, whatever that is, Jeff spends this number of overnights with, in this case, with the one child. And then from there, we can figure out the percentage and use that in other calculations. And what are those other calculations? Well, it just so happens that in Florida, they have asked us to actually do the child support calculations based on their rules, their statute. And so now that we've collected all of this information, financial information, time with the children, and so forth, we know who's going to be paying child support to whom and in what dollar amount to the penny. We handle all that calculation, and we provide the supporting paperwork as well. So in this scenario, as Stephanie's filling this out, and she says that Jeff is going to be spending 2 nights a week, she sees that he's going to be paying child support based on how much I make versus how much he makes, and he's going to be paying roughly $857 a month. Now, she's saying to herself, now I know he expressed an interest in having our child 3 nights a week. Let me just see what that's going to do to the whole child support thing. And instantaneously, I go from $857 a month to just over $300. That's a big difference. So she's going to think about it. Let's put that back to 2. All right. So that's a very complex series of calculations that we do and paperwork that we prepare that I'll show you in just a moment to do the child support calculations. And, it's the kind of thing that we can handle if you'd like us to. Finally, there's some additional questions about your request, about other relief, and so forth. And basically, we get through to the end. Let's just pretend I walk through to the end, and I get to the final review. And basically, TurboCourt just analyzed the entire interview, and it said everything's good. There's no missing fields. There's no data that conflicts with other fields. The validations are all good. And so you may proceed. And so now when I click next, what TurboCourt is doing is it is analyzing all of that information that I've just provided, and it will generate automatically right now the complete set of forms that are needed based on the way Stephanie answered that interview. So let's give it a moment and let's see what it does. And if you recall, it's quite a substantial number of forms that we're generating on the fly right now. Okay, it's done. So we give every single set of forms a unique identification number. This form set is completed. And as I scroll down, let's just take a look at a few of these. We've got the petition itself, so let's take a look at this. We generate all of these forms as PDF forms. And these will be your forms, of course. This is the Florida form, but we'll adapt this to your forms, your data requirements, and so forth. So there we go. Stephanie and Jeff. Everything is nice and neat, easy to read and fill out. Just jump down through a few pages here. And the final page looks like it's for their notary. So that's your petition. And that long form, that financial affidavit, basically your tax return, we'll generate that. And again, if there's any calculations that needed to be done, we'll do all of the calculations. We just ask for the raw data from the filer in terms of how much they make. They may have like 3 different jobs part-time, and then they are trying to figure out what their average monthly income is or something like that. Again, they don't have to do any of that math. We will do all of that for them. So whatever they've provided, obviously will be on that form. So here's that child support guidelines worksheet that I was talking about, where we will calculate the child support based on Florida rules. And so they either qualified in different ways. So here are all the different fields that need to be filled out. Percentages. Filers on their own almost never get this right, apparently, as the clerks tell us. So they're really grateful to have this. So anyway, there you go. There's that $856, I think, is the number, the final number that it came out as. And obviously many, many other forms as well. And so at this point, depending on the service that's being made available, the filer can then print these forms and bring them to your court along with the appropriate filing fees. Or if you have electronic delivery set up, then we can make available the ability for them to electronically deliver the forms directly to you. We'll collect the filing fees up front, and we will calculate the filing fees, again, based on your fee schedule to the exact penny, so that you never are given either too much or too little in terms of filing fees and then have to refund money or ask for more money from the filer. So we'll also calculate filing fees accurately based on the nature of the filing, and then submit those forms to you along with the filing fees. And if you want the data, all of that information that was collected in the questionnaire, we can pass you that information so that you can have it go into your case management system automatically. So there's a number of different services that are available once that form set is completed. So that's basically a pro se self-represented litigant application. This one happens to be a pretty complex one, Florida family law, but as you can see, we've designed it in such a way that even as long as this is, it's step by step, it flows very smoothly and easily, bite-sized pieces of information, and lots of abilities to understand what's being asked, review and edit if necessary, and then of course validations and generating just the forms that you need based on this filer's circumstances. So there you go.